everyone and welcome back. This is Laura and today I'm sharing with you my 10 cards 1 kit video featuring the Love From Lizi October card kit. For this first card I decided to recreate the pattern that appears on this cut apart piece, and I'm actually making this so it will fit on a full size note card rather than just being a feature accent cut apart. So I dug through the pattern papers and I cut thin strips of each of the patterns so I could replicate what's on that cut apart piece, and then I covered a piece of white cardstock from my stash with ATG, which is just double-sided sticky tape, and then I'm just laying these down in the order that they appear. I believe I did make one substitution for one of the patterned pieces. I can't remember now which one it is, but I think there is one slight difference. I think I added in the blue leaves instead of the pink. So I went ahead and trimmed off any of the excess, and then I have some Nouveau Glimmer paste, and I'm just applying this using a baby wipe. I have heard a couple horror stories of people going directly into the Nouveau mousse with their fingers, and then the bacteria and things from their fingers transferring into the pot, and it's a really nice environment for that stuff to grow, so I make sure never to put my finger directly into this mousse, so I'm using a clean baby wipe, and I'm just rubbing that all over these bark wood pieces, which are just beautiful. Then, of course, because you can't put two pieces of paper next to each other without using a peel-off, I use these peel-offs an awful lot in this particular 10 cards 1 kit. I always make good use of them, but I was really drawn to the shine on these ones. So I'm just tucking any of that excess behind my card panel and then adding some more of that ATG tape onto the back so I can mount this onto my card base, just making sure I tuck in any of that kind of excess sticky tape. So I'm going to lay that down on one of the card bases. All of my card bases I pre-cut before I started and pre-scored. They are all side folding portrait or top folding horizontal card bases. Okay, so here you'll see why I should have kind of what I like to call dry fit this first, just kind of lay everything down. I realised that actually that first leaf that I sat down, I didn't want that exactly where it was. I wanted it to lay slightly on top of these two. But no problem, I just peeled that up and I'll go ahead and wipe off any of the adhesive from the back, and then I'm actually going to add some double-sided foam dots. I'm just going to clean up my card base in the background there, try not to move everything around, and then peel off the backing tape and lay those down. I think these bark pieces are really interesting to work with. I'm really glad they were included in the kit. I haven't seen anything like these before and I really enjoyed working with them. So then just to finish this off, I took again just some inspiration from that cut apart piece, and I'm using some of the add-on stickers that I purchased just to complete my sentiment across the bottom 2 rows. And that's it, card number 1 is finished. So moving on to card 2. So for card 2, I fussy cut this takeaway coffee cup, and then I have another one of the cut apart pieces, and I'm going to lay down some washi tape. There is a patterned paper that matches this if you didn't pick up the washi add-on, but because I had the washi I decided to use 2 strips of washi tape and save my patterned paper for another project. I'll just tuck those ends behind the card. I'm getting better at remembering to do all of this before I lay everything down, but you'll see I probably will make that mistake at some point where I've laid something down that I shouldn't have yet, but it happens to us all, I guess. Once again, just using those peel-offs to outline this piece. As I mentioned on the last card, I really enjoyed these peel-offs. The shine on them is just perfect for this autumnal feeling card colours. Again, we've got another cut apart. I really enjoyed working with these. They feature on the majority of my cards, and I do think they're a really fun addition in these card kits. So I just lay that down off to the side, and I'm creating sort of a hodgepodge of different pieces and just building it up, and I really like how this one turned out. It reminds me of some other cards that I've made in the past that I've worked in this way, and you'll see that I make another card in a similar style to this, and I just really like to take the time to work this way and sort of have a look at the different pieces that I've got and lay them down and try and piece everything together, and they do end up becoming, I think, my favourite cards. So I have here this A is for autumn, and I've just mounted that up on some double-sided foam dots, and then I'm mounting up the coffee cup, and I also took one of the flower pieces and fussy cut that so I could stick it on top to kind of make this almost like a decoupage layering piece, and I'll stick that down and then finish this off with a little heart that I got from the ephemera bag also. Once again, just using foam dots, I used 2 layers this time so it could sit on top of the flower. And then of course I finished that off with the sentiment banner that you saw me kind of dry fit just earlier on. I played around with the placement for a minute, and then because that bottom section was a little bit blank, I had to root through what I had left. I say what I had left, I was only on my second card, so I had an awful lot left, and I picked this pumpkin sticker. Then I went ahead and added some adhesive onto the back of all of this, and I'm adding this to the brown cardstock that I've cut down to be a top folding note card, and I've just created this to be slightly smaller so it leaves a border all around the edges. To finish this off, I added some Nuvo drops just to highlight the centres of some of the flowers. And you see I made a mistake there and just wiped it away. If you work quick enough, you can wipe away this glossy accents, Nuvo drops rather, and it won't leave any marks behind. I finished off with some Wink of Stella on the heart, and that's card 2 finished. So moving into card 3, I did a whole bunch of die cutting. I cut 4 of each of these leaves, 2 each of these leaves, so I had 4 of each of the pearlized cardstock colours. I was really impressed with these dies. I hadn't looked at them close enough to realise that they leave such beautiful detail when you cut them, so that was a really nice surprise. And then once I had them all cut, I just laid them down on one of my card bases and just kind of played around with this for a while until I was happy with the layout. I fussed with this for far longer than was necessary, but I was trying to make sure that I didn't have the same shape or the same colour too close together, and once I was happy with this, I could go ahead and stick it all down. There were a couple pieces that actually, once I picked them up and added the glue, I kind of moved around where they were going to sit anyway, so you probably could just do this straight away and commit to the glue, but I like to kind of lay everything down first, make sure I've got enough of my die cut shapes before I pack away my die cut machine, and then go ahead and stick those all down. Once they're all stuck, I'll wait for the glue to dry for just a minute. I'll press everything down with an acrylic block and set it upside down while it dries, and then I'll be able to trim off the excess later on. Here I have an oval that's cut from one of the pearlized cardstocks also, and I've just prepped that with an anti-static powder tool because I'm going to do some heat embossing. I've stamped one of the sentiments from the stamp set, and then I'll go ahead and pour my embossing powder over the top of the Versamark sticky ink, and that will help it just stick in place. And this is a really beautiful embossing powder that coordinated really well with the colours in this kit, so I was glad that I had this really autumnal kind of orangey colour. I'll heat set that with my heat gun, and then I have another oval that's just a layering shape to add a backer to this piece, and I'm going to mount everything up with some foam tape. I was really into dimension this month. I think everything features some kind of foam or some kind of lift off the background of the card. Once I was happy with where that was, I decided to go ahead and add a whole bunch of sequins to kind of fill in some of the empty space in the background. I've just poured the sequins into a little tray that I have here. It's a little bit easier to work this way because you can see all the different colours and you can funnel everything back into the bag when you're done. I added some of the really tiny sequins on top of my sentiment panel, and it kind of makes it look like almost like a wood-mounted panel to me. I really like that touch. Okay, so on to card 4. For this card, I decided, like a crazy person, to do a whole bunch of fussy cutting of the acorn patterned paper, and I cut a whole bunch of those. I just showed you the end of one on camera, so you didn't have to sit and watch me fussy cut, because it probably took me a good few minutes to do this. And then I've covered my blue cardstock with some adhesive, and I'm just laying this piece of paper over the top, which is one of the 6x6 patterned papers, and then I'll just trim off the excess. It's quite rare that I'll actually cover the whole panel with one particular colour, but sometimes I like to mix it up and do it this way. I again have another one of the cut aparts and I'm applying some adhesive onto the back, and this is the nuts about you sentiment, which I really love, and this is why I wanted to do the fussy cutting, to have some extra acorns so I could kind of fill in that background and layer up some of the pieces using foam dots. So some of the acorns matched what was on the background and I wanted to add those with some foam tape just for some interest. This is definitely the simplest card that I made in terms of it's simply just a patterned piece of paper and one of the cut aparts. You could definitely skip adding all these extra acorns to really simplify it, but I think it adds something really nice to have the extra layer and the extra dimension of the foam tape and just a couple more acorns. Okay, moving on to our next card, I'm going to start with the embossing folder and this gold mirrorboard cardstock and just run that through my die cut machine on the embossing setting, and it leaves a really detailed embossed image, and I think it looks really nice on this gold mirror. I decided to trim that down quite significantly so I have a square piece, and I'm going to attach that to the red card base. I think this red is really beautiful. It's a really deep dark red, and I'm really happy that this colour was included in the kit, and I'm hoping that it's available on its own soon. So I've added some adhesive to this strip of patterned paper, and I've cut that down to be slightly smaller so that red card base pokes through all around the edges of each of these pieces, and of course I'm going to use my peel-offs. Because I don't want the peel-off to go all the way to the edge, I'm just using my craft knife and just gently pressing into the peel-off with enough pressure to cut through it, but not to cut through the card base, and then I can just lift the excess away. Here I have the pumpkin cut apart piece, and I'm adding some adhesive to that and layering it onto one of the pearlized cardstocks because I wanted to create a backing piece. So I'm just using the edge of my trimmer to kind of measure just how much extra I need to leave so I've got a nice even border around the edges, and then trimming that off, and I think it really helps that make that pop against the gold background. Here I was playing with some ideas, and I have the 3 skeleton leaves, or 3 of the skeleton leaves, and then those pumpkin pieces, and I'm just kind of trying to figure out exactly where I want everything. I generally don't plan my cards in advance, I just start making and I see what happens. Sometimes it is a little bit easier to plan in advance, but generally when I'm making 10 cards from one kit, I just kind of start making and see where I end up. So I'm adding some glue onto the back of one of the pumpkins, or I'm trying to, I think my glue was blocked there. And then I'm going to lay one down flat, and I'm trying to remember if I used foam dots. I think I did for this piece. There we go, here they come. So I'm using some more of those foam dots. These are the scrapbook adhesive foam squares, and they come in a couple different sizes. These are the smaller ones. Once I've got that in position, I needed to add something in that top corner. Oh, we've got a sentiment first. So we've got one of these banner pieces. I really like that banner shape for sentiments. I think it's nice and interesting and kind of adds some kind of like flow across the card because of that wave. So here I have this Farm Fresh. I believe this was from the sticker pack, and I'm doing the same thing that I did with my pumpkin piece, and I'm just adding some of the pearlized cardstock behind it to help separate it from that gold background. Once I'm happy with where I'm going to put that, I'll add some adhesive and stick it down. And that is card, I believe, 5 finished. So here for card 6, I decided I wanted to cut out the centre of this cut apart piece, and I could see that I had an oval that matched pretty perfectly, so I did some partial die cutting, and I just cut up to where that washi tape is. And that gave me a nice perfect oval without me having to freehand it, which probably would have been a bit of a disaster. And then I was able to just finish off those cut lines with my craft knife and just carefully follow the outline of the design. I made sure to use a self-healing mat underneath as I was cutting. My desk mat is actually a self-healing mat, but I never cut on it because it's my desk mat, and I have a smaller separate self-healing mat that I use for that. That just makes sense for me to work that way. Here I've got a layering oval, and I'm just going to run that through my die cut machine, and I can see that it won't quite reach the bottom, but because that's going to be covered by the pumpkin anyway, that works perfectly. Here I have some of the beautiful ribbon. Really love this ribbon, love the shine, and I'm just going to lay that across the top and do my trick that I always use when I need to tie a ribbon across the top of a card. I never risk, I think is the word I want to use. I never risk kind of doing that directly on my card panel because I find it difficult enough to tie bows at the best of times. Anyway, I'm rambling. So I've laid this onto my card base, and then I'm just going to lift up the edge of that pumpkin and just trying to tuck this piece behind, and I have got some foam tape behind this. I'll just centre that up and lay it down, and this all looks lovely on that orange pearlized piece in the background. I'm just going to put a tiny bit of glue behind that pumpkin stem, just to make sure it stays in place. So at this point I wanted to use the skeleton leaves that I considered using in the previous card, and I'm just going to tuck those behind the foam tape and arrange them on the side. It's quite difficult to see on camera, but it just adds some nice extra texture when you look at it in real life. So I went ahead and tied my bow. As I mentioned, I didn't do that directly on this ribbon. I tied it separately, and then I'll just use some glue to stick that down, and you would never know. Here I've got the gems and I'm just using my craft knife to pick those up and place them on some of the larger flowers. And then I'll actually use some glossy accents later on to fill in the centres of the smaller flowers. I wanted to add a bit more interest to that heart, so I'm using a jelly roll pen. I believe this is a Stardust pen, and I'm just colouring that in to leave some shine behind. You could use like a wink of Stella or something like that, whatever it is that you have. And then I'll top this off with glossy accents also, just to add some really nice dimension. Here I'm adding some tape all over the card base, and then I'll lay this panel that I've been working on top. And this card is pretty much finished except for some extra shine on the pumpkin. I couldn't help myself. I went ahead and added some Wink of Stella and then finished off with those glossy accent details that I mentioned. I always find it difficult to work with glossy accents when I'm doing a 10 cards 1 kit video because chances are I'm going to smudge it at some point, so I try and leave it to one of my last cards, or if I'm working across a couple of nights I leave it to the last card of the night. This one was the first card of my second night filming, and I am so proud of myself that I didn't lay anything on top of this and I didn't smudge it, and it actually managed to survive. I don't know if anybody else has those problems with glossy accents, but I always find when I use glossy accents, I set my card aside to dry, then I forget that it's drying and I lay something on top of it. Okay, enough about glossy accents and onto some more stamping. Here I have the little teacup or coffee cup from the stamp set, and I've just used a piece of washi tape to help me get a somewhat perfect diagonal, just to help me make sure I stamp correctly across this piece. And then I'm just going to fill in this whole panel, working my way right across with this little coffee cup, making sure that some of the stamping falls off the edges. I did use a rectangle die to trim this down to size. And then here I have some of the pearlized cardstock that I'm prepping with my anti-static powder tool, because I couldn't just use that embossing powder once. I really liked the way it looked, so I wanted to do some repeat stamping of this sentiment, and then I'd be able to lay that across my card front. After I'd done my first stamp, I added some powder so I could see where it was. The problem with working with a clear ink is that it can be difficult to see where you've stamped. Sometimes you can kind of see on certain cardstocks or in certain light because it leaves behind almost like a watermark or like a wet look, but I found it was just easier to apply the powder as I was working. I made sure to tap off any of the excess, and then because this piece is quite small, I held it with my tweezers so I wouldn't burn my fingers, and then I'm just using my heat gun to heat set that. I made sure to get it really good and hot before bringing it to the paper because I wanted to avoid warping as much as possible. And then just off camera, I didn't do any fancy colouring, I just did one colour of coffee inside my cups, and I picked an orange that would match my embossing powder. I also cut a piece of orange foam just to give some nice flat dimension behind this. I actually used the same die that I'd used to cut the paper piece, but you can see when I stuck the two together the foam was bigger, and this kind of confused me at first, but then I remembered that after you run foam through your die cut machine, it kind of poofs back out, and I think that was the reason for the difference in the sizes. I mounted this down onto my card, and then this is one of those occasions where I should have done my cutting before my panel was stuck down to my card, but I forgot. So I stuck this piece down, and then I'm realising, how am I going to trim these edges? I tried to do it with everything still stuck down, and then I thought, no Laura, that's a bad idea. It's only glue, it's wet glue, so it's not stuck yet. So I just peeled everything up, trimmed off the excess, used the excuse while I'm there, why not, add some peel-offs, and then I applied some more of that wet glue onto the back of this piece and stuck it down, and this time left it alone and let it dry. I really like how this one turned out. I like the repeat stamping of the coffee cup, and I think it's quite a different look to all of the other cards that I made this month. Okay, now we've got these wood pieces. I had to do some stamping on these. I think these are really sweet, these kind of little like cross sections of a branch, I would say, and just I knew that I wanted to stamp on them. I wasn't sure what inks were going to work best, but I knew that heat embossing would work really well, so I decided to do some more heat embossing, and I actually cut apart some of my stamps so I could have the sunflower, and then I heat embossed the sunflower, the pumpkin, and two of them have leaves. Here I've got some more of the ribbon, and I just measured the piece that I need, added some ATG on the back of it so it would be a self-adhesive ribbon, and then I'm just using the lines on my grid mat to line this up. So I press this down first onto the back of my card, or the inside of my card, and then I actually allowed the overlap of these two pieces to be at the front because I thought I was going to cover it up, and it doesn't get covered up in the way that I thought it would originally, but I still think it looks really nice. Next I took some more glue and added it onto the back of one of the wreaths, and I'm actually going to layer this up with another one because I felt like they looked really nice one on top of the other. I wasn't too keen on using the sentiment for this particular card. I think it's a really nice sentiment, but not for this particular card, so you'll see that I cover that up a little bit later on. At this point I decided I wanted a strip of cardstock underneath my ribbon, so I somewhat carefully lifted that up and then stuck down this strip of cardstock and trimmed off the excess. I played with this card quite a lot. It's similar to, I believe, card number 2, where I wanted to kind of add a whole bunch of different pieces and just see where it leads me, and you'll see that I played with this for a while, kind of trying to decide what I wanted where. I really liked this kind of tag or topper with the pumpkin, and I decided to only use 3 of the wood slices. So I have the pumpkin, the leaves, and the sunflower. I just used some regular wet glue to stick these down, and it has held really well. I let it dry fully before kind of testing it, and it dried perfectly and will hold those in place. Here I'm using a sticker just to cover up that sentiment and replace it with a slightly different one, and then I have another sticker here which I think just kind of fills in that empty space. I decided to add this little banner at the top, which I've added a sticker to also, and then I've got these little mushrooms, which as soon as I saw them I knew I wanted to use them on a card, and I'm just trying to decide how I want to lay them together, and I actually glued them together before applying my foam squares because it was a little bit easier that way because I had like a larger surface area to apply those foam squares to, and I do tend, as you've seen in my videos, to completely cover something in foam squares if I'm going to use them. It's kind of an all or nothing for me, I think. And that card is, oh, not yet, I'll trim off the excess, and then that card is finished. Again, I really liked how this one turned out. I do like working in that way of kind of just throwing things at the card and seeing what sticks. Okay, on to card 9. Again, I'm using this trick of using the washi tape rather than some pieces of the patterned paper because I found that I had a duplicate available to me, and I've got tons of the washi tape and not so much of the patterned paper, so I'm going to hoard the patterned paper. I've got the pumpkin spice and everything nice. Really love this cutter part, really love pumpkin spice. I'm definitely a fan of a pumpkin spice latte, so I had to use this one. I'm not sure if I'm even going to send it to anyone or if it's just going to sit on my desk as kind of an autumn pumpkin spice decoration. So once I had that stuck down, I wrapped some of the twine around the top a couple times. Nothing fancy, just wrapping it around the inside of the card and then tying it in a knot. And I'll go ahead and trim off any of the excess of that knot once I'm happy. I just made sure to keep it really tight to the card base because there isn't any glue holding this in place, so it has to be quite tight so it doesn't kind of slip down and fall off. I gave the twine a bit of a haircut because it was quite frayed and there was a lot of kind of fluff coming off of it, so I just trimmed some of that off to neaten it up. I've again got my Wink of Stella. I was definitely enjoying the Wink of Stella and the shine this month. I don't know if that'll continue. It generally seems to be a trend. I like things that shine. I like dimension. We'll see. So I applied that onto the coffee cup. And then I got a couple more of my stickers, and I'm just adding this little tiny pumpkin spice latte season sticker. Then I'm adding some glossy accents to the steam that's coming off the top of the coffee and also the coffee. This was my second to last card, and I did manage to smudge the glossy accents just a little bit. I don't think anyone other than me would notice, but what can I say? I should not be trusted with glossy accents. It actually doesn't take that long to dry, but there we go. I always manage to smudge it somehow. Okay, on to card 10. Again, I have a cutter part and I'm removing the centre using a matching circle die, and I'm going to replace it with this cute little fox, and I'll cut him using a smaller nested circle die. So I ran both of those through my die cut machine, and then I'm just going to add some double-sided tape onto the back of this piece. The tape I'm using is ever so slightly wider than the gaps I had around the circle, so I just made sure to tuck in the edges as I worked, and then I wouldn't have any kind of sticky residue on the front of my card base. I'm using the red card. If you're keeping up, you probably knew that that was the only one I had left, and I'm sticking down that striped piece and just making sure any of that extra sticky is removed from the inside of the circle. It was my one last chance to use, I say one last chance. I'm not throwing away the peel-offs when I finish with my 10 cards, but it was my last chance in this 10 cards 1 kit video to use the peel-offs, so I lay those down along the edge. And then I've got Mr. Fox in the middle, and I'm just going to have a play here with some of the ephemera pieces and some of the stickers to kind of decide exactly where I want everything to sit. I knew that I'd slightly misaligned my circle die, and there's a little chunk of the circle missing on the right hand side of the fox, so I wanted to make sure to disguise that with whatever I was laying on top. You should be able to see it here. And then I've covered it up with these blossoms. Those blossoms are going to move a couple times before I'm done, but that's one thing that's great about the ATG. It kind of takes a minute to like really set in place, and if you're careful, you can kind of peel things up before it's completely set. So I used a combination of my ephemera pieces and also my stickers to decorate the outside of Mr. Fox, and I used a combination of sticking things down flat to the card base and using some dimension with my foam squares. So here I'm deciding for the first time to move this a little bit. I think it moved maybe 3 or 4 times before I was finished, but I was having fun with it. I was kind of going with the approach of let's see what I like, let's place things down, see what looks good to me, and if I need to move something, I'm going to go ahead and move it. I wasn't getting too stressed over this. So I'm almost done with fussing around with this piece. I thought that I knew where I wanted things, I placed down my sticker, and then I changed my mind and I peeled it up again. One of the reasons I have kept this in the video is to show you that it's okay to spend some time kind of fussing with things and deciding where you want them, even if you've placed something down. As long as you haven't pressed too firmly and it hasn't been sat there for too long, you can generally peel things up and try again. So I added some foam dots, decided I needed just one more, and stuck down this flower at the bottom here, and then finally I was finished with the placement of this card, and I just wanted to darken up Mr. Fox's nose with a black glaze pen, and also darken up his little eyes too. So we are almost finished. I think Mr. Fox looks very happy nestled in his little circle of autumnal colours and foliage. And I'll just do a quick recap of all 10 cards. If you have been inspired by this video, and if you want to maybe recreate one of these cards, or if you're going to create something using the same kind of let's throw it at the card and see what sticks approach, then do let me know in the comments. Let me know your favourite card as well. My favourite card, I think, is probably the 2nd or the 5th. I don't know, I can't quite. Then again, I love this coffee one. I like them all. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you're feeling inspired. If you want to get your hands on any of these products, I'll have links in the description while stocks last. The Love From Lizi kits do sell out really quickly, so if you've missed out on this kit and you don't want that to happen in the future, you can go ahead and purchase your subscription for next month right now. Thank you so much for joining me today. On screen right now there's a couple more videos I think you might enjoy, and if you're not already a subscriber, go ahead and click that logo to subscribe to this channel, and I hope to see you again soon. That's all from me. Bye for now.